It's not about nodebot specifically, it's about serverless architecture, the super secret special talk that's coming up after this talk, but it has robots in it, so don't be fully disappointed. Like, obviously it has robots in it. I have a robot sitting in front of me, and I wouldn't be so cruel as to just like dangle a nodebot in front of you and then be like, I'm just not gonna mention it. No, that would be rude. But the main thing I'm here to talk about today is OAuth, OpenID Connect, and user identity. So raise your hand if you work on an application that has logins of any shape, kind, form, or fashion. Most of us, right? So yeah, we've all had to deal with usernames and passwords. But first, a little bit about me, because I've actually had this question asked me, do you even live here? No. Auth0 flew me in from Austin to speak. I was at, what conference was I at? I've been to like 30 this year, and I met two of the other organizers of JavaScriptMN. And I said, hey, my company's letting me go places to speak. Do you want me to come speak at your user group? And they said, sure. So anyway, Austinite, soonish to be Seattleite. I'm a developer evangelist at Auth0, but before you say, oh, this is a product pitch for Auth0, why am I even here? I don't want to use your product. No. While it is true that my company paid my travel and allotted plenty of work time for me to speak here, they're much more interested about my talk being about web standards, i.e. OAuth and OpenID Connect, than they are about Auth0. So, because basically, honestly, our product kind of sells itself. So really, I talk about web standards, and they pay me to do that. So you know, just don't worry about it. This is not a product pitch. I won't mention Auth0 except by name. I won't pull up their website, won't pull up our product. However, if you do have authentication problems in your web app or whatever, and you want help with that, let me know after the talk. I'll gladly give you the elevator pitch. But I'm not going to force everybody to sit through that elevator pitch. So now that I've put that notion aside, I'm going to come back to me, the important part. You know, I've learned to be a narcissist as a developer evangelist. So I'm an electrical engineering adjacent student at Arizona State University. What that means is I'm technically an engineering management student because of grades from a previous bachelor's degree, but I will be at electrical engineering soon. I am gender non-binary and or genderqueer. My preferred pronouns are they, them. Feel free to respectfully ask me any questions about what it's like to be genderqueer in a very not genderqueer friendly society, especially in tech. Just, you know, respectful questions. Like, don't ask me questions about my physical body, because you wouldn't ask a person who wasn't genderqueer about their physical body. So it's kind of off limits. So I really need people to stop saying sports ball sarcastically when I talk about the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I'm sure most Minnesotans I've met are fans of one sport or another, be it football or baseball or whatever. They're all great. Could we just stop yelling sports ball if we don't like sports? Because, come on, people are allowed to like different things other than code. Like, raise your hand if you like a sport, any sport. Yeah, that's like half of you. So let's stop sarcastically saying sports ball, shall we? Thanks. Oh, and Twins fans, as a Diamondbacks fan, I feel ya. I really do. I feel the pain. October's gonna suck. I have two adorable cats. That one is Ace. My partner is very good at describing both of our cats. That is Arya. She is what happens when you leave a potato in the pantry for too long and it sprouts legs, grows fur, and starts making noise. That implies her intelligence level, not her, well, and her size. She's only like 6 pounds and super floofy, so maybe she is just like a sentient potato. She has fallen from a sitting position off our coffee table. Like, she was sitting, not on the edge, but like the middle. She was sitting in the middle of our coffee table and managed to fall off from a sitting position. Like, I don't, how? Anyway. But enough about me. I want you to close your eyes and I want you to think about the last time you had to generate a new password and save it to your password manager just to use a thing once. And oh, right, you're in a hurry because it's tickets to a ball game and you don't have an account with them, so you basically create your password like Simone Giertz would do it, and you roll your face against the keyboard to create a secure password. Or you use that junk password you use everywhere because we all do it. We all have that one password that we've used on like 80-something different sites because we don't want to think of a new password. We don't want to open a one password. It's a pain, right? It's a giant pain. I don't want more than 1 to 2 passwords in my life. One that everybody knows and one that, well, everybody meaning my family because they die, and then one that only I know, so the stuff my family shouldn't see won't be seen. So if you don't want to make new passwords, why would you put your users through that? When you think about it from an empathetic standpoint, if you don't want to create new passwords, your users probably don't either, especially if they're not technically minded, especially if they probably don't have a password manager. If they don't have a password manager, worse, they're probably going to create insecure passwords or a password they've used everywhere else, and if someone else's service gets hacked, you are now in trouble because they will be able to hack into the account on your site from their account because they use the same password everywhere. So why put your users through that? Why put yourself through that indirectly? And how would you fare if you were hacked? Do you have the resources and the security to protect user data and passwords? Unless your company has more than 110 or so people, probably not. It's a lot of work and a lot of resources to keep stored passwords safe. The security field is constantly changing. And so having engineers dedicated to keeping passwords safe, and yes, you would need engineers dedicated to keeping passwords safe, would be constantly re-upping their knowledge in order to keep those passwords out of the hands they don't belong in. So this is where OAuth 2.0 comes in. And this is because basically it allows you to say, well, I don't want to deal with it, so I'm going to let Facebook or Google or Twitter deal with it. That way, if they get hacked, I can point at them and go, well, they're the ones who got hacked. Sorry. This wasn't me. Also, you don't have to make your users come up with a new password. They use their Twitter password or their Google password, which they probably already have one or both of those. Yeah, that's great. Wait, isn't OAuth a giant pain to use? Isn't it terrible or awful? No. I contend that 90% of developers who think OAuth is awful heard it from a senior developer when they were a junior developer, took it on without any research, and then just started repeating it. Because that's how I did it. When I started development, I was 2 weeks into my first development job, and this was like, OAuth is terrible, and I wanted to look cool, so I was like, oh yeah, OAuth is the worst. Yeah, worst. And then I looked it up, and it turns out it's not that bad. So I'm pretty sure 90% of developers are in that same state, where they just heard it from somebody else, and they wanted to look cool, so they said they hated it, but it's really not that bad. So it's kind of funny, Dropbox has a better diagram than I do about how OAuth works. So your user presses a connect button, be it Twitter, Google, Dropbox, whatever. They then get redirected to a site that's hosted by the person, by the entity they're sending into, Google, Dropbox, whatever. And it asks them to enter their username and password. So you never touch that user's username and password. They only enter it into the entity that they are signing into, right? So once they've authorized your application, not just by entering their username and password, but by clicking, yes, I allow this app to access my profile or such and such, and much like when you install an app on your phone and it asks for a list of permissions, same thing with OAuth, asks for a list of permissions. And once you're allowed, it sends back what's called a access token, or access code. The access code doesn't work on the API. You can't just immediately send that back and expect API responses. You have to send that back to your server, which then sends the code back to the authorization server, which then sends back an authorization token. Now the token is what gets you into their API. The reason they do it that way is so that the token never touches the browser. Because as any security, even intermediate would know, anything that touches the browser is immediately insecure because users can see it. And it's immediately insecure for a whole litany of other reasons. So the reason OAuth does that is to prevent the access token, the actual key. It's like saying, it's like your house key, right? The access token's like your house key, and the code is the key to the safe to get your house key. You would give the code to a trusted party that could go get the house key and then get in your house, right? Instead of just like throwing your key at them in public. Which is kind of what sending your access token around the browser would be like. It'd be like hurling your house key at someone in public. So yeah. Once everything's done, you have an access token that you can access the originating API with. This is great if you want to access data from the originating login. So if you want someone's Google data, of course you ask for permission before you log in. And this is one slide I haven't added yet to this talk, but and I didn't think I'd ever have to say this. Never, ever, 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 ever automate away the permission screen of an OAuth. The reason I'm saying that is because Pokemon Go and Niantic did that. If you signed in with Google for like the first 3 weeks that Pokemon Go existed, it didn't ask you for OAuth permissions. It just signed you in. Which is terrifying from a user security perspective because you don't know what permissions they were asking for. You don't know what they wanted out of your Google account. They just logged you into your Google account and took the permissions they wanted and hit OK for you. It's like someone taking your hand and forcing you to sign a legally binding contract. Like, terrifying. So I never thought I'd have to say this, but never, ever, ever automate that away. Always allow your users to hit allow. And if you have a reason to hide that from them, maybe you're doing something really shady and shouldn't do it. Anyway. Okay, I'm not reading that whole diagram. I'm just listening to you speak because you're louder than that diagram. So I need you to show me step by step how OAuth works. Luckily, I can do that. So this is the OAuth 2 playground. It was written by Google. It's really handy, actually, for showing step by step how OAuth works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get really close to my screen because that is really tiny. And I'm going to go to Google Plus because I haven't posted anything on there. So once I log in, it won't be embarrassing. Okay. All right. Log in. Okay. I'm going to authorize that API. Sure. Oh, something bad happened. Awesome. Oh, I never got the Wi-Fi password. What's the Wi-Fi password? This is why I never live code. Stuff like this happens.
It'll ask you to, so once you reload, it might ask you to log in.
By the way, you can make everything bigger by pressing Control+.
Yep, you got it.
Right, I know how to zoom into like my browser. I also don't want to like zoom in and make everything, I have my reasons. I've done this before, a few times.
Go ahead.
Continue, all right.
Capital O, Olson. Password guest, G-U-S-T, lowercase. Sorry about that.
So we were just talking about insecure passwords. I'm kidding. This is for public Wi-Fi, not for like a Gmail account.
Cool.
Yep. That does make me want to put my gray hat on and go find some stuff. No, I don't have a gray hat. What are you talking about? All right, there we go. So I'm going to go back to Google Plus. API. Sure. Oh, wait. No, just what? I love how things go differently on stage than they do at the hotel. All right. Cool. Oh, okay. Okay, so that was, okay. So the first thing you do with OAuth is you pick the scopes that you want. So for instance, Google has like 1 million scopes because they have 1 million products. And so they're saying these are the scopes that are available to you for Google. The scopes differ between products, though usually you will find profile, which is user profile, email, name, very common fields. And we'll talk about why those fields are becoming common when we talk about OpenID Connect. So what I was selecting was Google Plus, and I think I allowed it to log in as basically OAuth allowing me to log in with Google Plus. So I activated it. I'm going to activate it one more time, and it's going to redirect me to the Google login page. But because I'm already logged in on like 80 accounts, it's going to have me pick an account. So I'm going to pick my work account. And then this is the screen I was telling you, don't automate your users away from this. Like, do not, under any circumstances, ever hit that allow button for your users, or I will find you. Because I would be very mad, personally, if you do that. Because when you think about it, this could be things like post to your Facebook wall, write to your Twitter account. And we all know posts to Facebook and tweets can get you fired, right? So do not, under any circumstances, take away your users' autonomy. And but luckily, I'm autonomous, and I know that that app doesn't do anything. So I'm going to do that. And so I've hit allow. And so now it returns a 302 found, which means I allowed the login and it found my account. It then sends a location that it redirected back to. Now, it redirected back with a code in the query parameter. That code is the authorization code I talked about when we talked about the workflow. So you can see here under the steps, this is exchange authorization code for tokens. I'm going to get a tiny bit bigger. That screen's smaller than I thought, but this is also not friendly. So I'm going to hit exchange for tokens. Now I've got a refresh token and an access token. So who wants to remember their Twitter password every 24 hours for like 4 different apps of their phone that they're logged into Twitter for? I guess like one person wants to do that. Good for you. The rest of us don't. The rest of us would rather like log in once and forget about it. That is what a refresh token is for. So a refresh token, it's even more sacred than an access token because it allows you to generate new access tokens. So access tokens have an expiration date. If you try to use it after that point, the API will go, nope, can't do it, out of date. What a refresh token does is allows you to create a new access token with a later expiration date and continue making API requests. So when you make a refresh token, or if you're ever handling refresh tokens, they are easily one of the most dangerous things that can get leaked. Because if you get a hold of someone's refresh token, you can generate access tokens for them until you're caught and it's revoked, or until the end of time, whichever comes first. So yeah, be careful with refresh tokens. And then the last step, after we've got exchanged our code for tokens, which I can't reshrink that apparently. Come on, there we go. Let's scroll down a little. Apparently scrolling doesn't want to work anymore. Neat. That'd be a cool time for my touchpad to like completely fail on me. Would be right now. That'd be great. Yeah, it just doesn't want to go. All right, cool. It's probably locked or something. Okay. I forgot the URL. All right. Then you can make requests to the API. So I can enter any Google API URL here, and it would send my access token with it, and then I would get data back because I'm authorized as a third party. So those are the key components of OAuth. You don't have to deal with usernames and passwords or storing them because you never touch them. The only people who touch them are Google or Twitter or whomever you allow to log in. If you deal with data visualization from a user perspective, it's also handy because you can get data. You can have one person log into several social accounts, and then you can aggregate their data from all those social accounts. Even if it's just one social account, this can be kind of fun. For instance, does anybody remember in February, someone launched GitHub Valentine, where you entered your GitHub username and it spit out your Valentine based on like your interactions on GitHub? No one remembers that? That was awesome. Okay, so you logged in with OAuth via GitHub, right? And it would get your access token. And because you allowed it access to your profile, it would go get your profile from GitHub, read it, read your interactions with other people, and then like through some like magic algorithm would say, this person is your GitHub Valentine or Twitter Valentine. There was a knockoff one for Twitter. So that's the kind of thing you can do with OAuth. It's not just not having to handle usernames and passwords. It's also, hey, it'd be really cool if I could just like bootstrap what I know about this user from what they've already put on GitHub or Twitter. So for instance, if you're creating a job application job app, you would allow logging in through GitHub, not just so you wouldn't have to deal with usernames and passwords, but so that way instead of your users having to write a resume, it would just be pre-populated with their GitHub information. So you can see how OAuth gets much more powerful than just authentication. But it's not a great platform for dealing with identity. And identity means any data about you. And we'll talk about that. Oh, yes, we'll talk about that soon. So your next response is, I don't want to handle all those API calls. I don't want 60 promises or 40 callbacks or whatever sitting in my JavaScript. Yes?
You said the token should never touch the browser, but obviously every web application puts the token in the browser somewhere.
They only put the code in the browser. Except for single-page applications. Single-page applications do. There is a workflow in OAuth 2.0 that does send a token directly back to the browser, but they have an extremely short expiration period, talking minutes, and they don't offer refresh tokens. But no, you get the code in your browser. Your browser sends it back to the server. Your server sends the code back to the third party. Third party sends token back. Token stays on server.
Right, but most web applications you use just keep you logged in indefinitely. What are they using?
Refresh tokens. So they get the refresh token along with the access token. They keep that on the server as well. And so when your access token gets kicked back and says this is expired, they use the refresh token, which is still just on the server, to generate a new access token and then use that new access token to make API calls. Either way, neither of those touch the browser. And in the case of single page applications, when you get a token directly to the browser, you're not allowed to use refresh tokens. It's not just a choice that these providers have made, it's in the specification. You're not allowed to use refresh tokens with that flow because it's really, really, really unsafe. Yes?
Generally, you're going to proxy all any requests that you need to make to that API through your server.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. You would proxy any call you would need to make to that third party through your server. Exactly. You do everything you can to make sure that access token and especially that refresh token stay on your server and never, ever, ever go to the browser. Because then someone can get a hold of it, someone can man in the middle it, someone could anything. It's just way out in the open. It's like I said, it's like hurling your house key at someone in public. Like everybody can see it. Everybody knows it's a house key because they can see it's a house key, and someone could just take it and then get in my house. So the next response I get after walking through the playground is usually, I don't want to do all those API calls. That's a lot of gets and posts, and I don't want to remember all that because, well, that's cool. So we're JavaScript folks, so let's check out Passport. Passport is one of the more popular libraries for dealing with OAuth and OAuth-related logins. Here's the site. It's got a really cool new look because Passport is supported by Auth0, so our designer got to work on this for fun and also pay. And I don't want to imply we don't pay people. We pay people. So we just got a brand new site for it. When you think about like, okay, Passport, what does it do actually? Like, what does it like do for me? So instead of you having to write out every single one of those calls, for instance, like here, oh, well, let me make that a little bigger. Maybe this one's a little more friendly with the zoom. Not much, no. Yeah, zoom's not a fun thing on a projector. All right, so Passport.authenticate handles all of those API calls for you. All you have to do is redirect your user to the authenticating server, and once they come back, you call Passport.authenticate. It handles the rest. It handles exchanging the code for a token. If you tell it to, it handles putting the token in the session for that user, still in the server, but in the session. It handles deserializing and serializing users. You can make database calls in there, all sorts of stuff. So instead of having to deal with 4 different HTTP calls, making sure they happened in order, and making sure none of them failed, Passport's great for that. Now, one of the problems with OAuth 2.0 is there's very little standardization as to what the URLs are that you go get them from. Luckily, they happen to be standardized by coincidence. A lot of people agreed, let's have these URLs, but some didn't. And so it can be a real pain if you get more than one OAuth provider remembering all the URLs. And that's where strategy comes in. So strategies are basically plugins to Passport that allow you to use different providers easily. So we've got Facebook, Google OAuth, Passport Twitter, Auth0, SAML, I think Twitch is on here, which is kind of cool. LinkedIn, for those of us who, like LinkedIn. Spotify, that one's one of my favorites because I like digging through my playlists and like figuring out what I played when and why. It's fun for data visualization anyway. So there are over 40, I want to say, strategies. So you can pick just about any provider. And there's also just like the standard Passport OAuth provider, where if you have one that isn't covered by a specific strategy, you pull in the OAuth provider, give it the URLs, and it handles the rest. So Passport's really great because while understanding OAuth and dealing with OAuth are not nightmares, implementing OAuth can be a nightmare, depending on the provider. So I'll give people that. Implementing OAuth can be a nightmare. Using OAuth is definitely not a nightmare. And there are similar libraries for just about every other language out there. I know this is JavaScript group, but y'all might use a different language on the back end of your server. So there are libraries like this for just about any other language. The ones I can think of off the top of my head, there's definitely one for Python, Ruby, Scala. The one in Elm is like almost 1.0, and Elm's not even a 1.0, so there you go. This is usually the first thing people want to get out of the way when they deal with a new web language is how do I get people to sign in quickly and get it out of my hair. So that being said, so I mentioned earlier that OAuth was starting to creep into the ID space, but it's terrible at actually handling user identification. For instance, think about the last time you logged into a site or to sign up for a site, right? And it said log in with Google, and you click OK, and you log in with Google, and then it asks you for your name. I'm pretty sure Google knows my name. Pretty sure. Like 99.9% sure Google knows my name. So why do I have to tell you again? Or birth date, or any of that nonsense. Any of it. Why do I have to enter that more than once a year? Ever. I don't get it. I do not understand it. It makes me do that when I have to enter my name into a form, especially after I've already logged in with an OAuth provider. And the reason for that is, up until recently, there really was no standard for the identity of a user. There was a standard for authentication, but no real standard for identity. So, as it happens on the web, when we don't standardize something, we end up with 50,000 ways to do it. Like we had 50,000 ways to do various things in CSS until CSS 3 came along and said, okay, we're just going to do it like this. And then we finally just got out of the whole browser prefixing era, and now everybody does it the same. Same with ID. We got to the point where there were like 50 different ways to access first name over 150 different social providers, and just trying to program around that was just like a nightmare. So we created OpenID Connect 1, and it was terrible. So we created OpenID Connect 2. So what OpenID Connect is, it's a layer around OAuth that handles identity. So you implement OAuth as part of OIDC. This is the part where things get confused, is they think they're two separate things, like you do either OIDC or OAuth. No, they're layers on top of each other. So, and what's really great is the OpenID Connect specification actually improves OAuth in a couple ways that I'll go into in a minute. And so OAuth is to authentication what OpenID Connect, also called OIDC, is to identity. And it's a standardized way of communicating the ID of a user between different social platforms. So now, hopefully, as more and more people implement OpenID Connect, when I log in with Google, it will know my first name, last name, birthday, da-da-da-da-da-da, and it'll fill that in for me. As long as we're not too lazy to actually take the information and use it. 50-50 on that. It's only a little complicated. OIDC, just like identity itself, is only a little complicated. There's a few layers. There's core, and then there's discovery, and then there's dynamic registration, and there's multiple response types, and then there's like 3 other layers on top of that. Don't get too concerned yet. It'll be all right. Core is fairly limited, but it gives you a user profile, which is really like 90-ish% of what you need from OIDC. The other layers you really only care about if you are an implementer, except discovery, which is pretty neat. So the discovery layer, its entire purpose is it says, okay, you're going to put a JSON file at this URL that we have standardized on your domain. And when someone requests that JSON file, they will get the endpoints for all of your OAuth stuff and all of your OIDC stuff. So instead of having to like write in every URL for OAuth, you know one URL, it's standardized, it's in the OIDC standard. You call that JSON file and it gives you the URLs for everything else. So if you have a provider that might change URLs or reversion APIs or might get acquired and their URL might change, discovery is handy. Because that way if their URL changes, you don't care because their known configuration URL has to stay the same. You go get it, and the only way it can change is they can redirect you and they have to inform you via an HTTP header, hey, this file is moved, and then you're supposed to use the new known configuration URL. Either way, much easier than who's ever had to rifle through docs to find an authorized token endpoint, all that stuff, right? I never want to do that again. I love the known configuration URL. Just go get it. It's got a JSON file. Good. You can even automate that out to a large degree. So this is OIDC core. This is actually OIDC core plus discovery. So ignore the part that says number 3 and 4. 3 and 4 discovery. So it looks a lot like OAuth because, like I said, it's built on top of OAuth. You request the user sign in. They opt to sign in with Google and they say, yes, I allow you. And then ignore the discovery part because in core, it requests a login auth and then redirects to the Google sign in. Oh, wait, so that's not the diagram, but okay, 6 shouldn't be there. That's neat. Anyway, 7 logs in and approves. 8, and now it returns a user identity. So instead of just returning a success, this user has logged in and authenticated, it will return a user identity. Meaning a first name, a last name, birth date, whatever that site has on you that was allowed in the scope. So much like OAuth, OpenID Connect has scopes. You can say, I want this information about the user, and the user will see on the permissions page, this is the information they want about you. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could log into like TurboTax or something, but like you could log into Google first, and then you wouldn't have to fill in like any of your personal information? It would be great. I would totally hit OK on that one. Anyway, so you get, the main difference in core is that instead of just getting a successful login, you also get that user's identity as far as the providing login service knows, as far as Google knows, as far as Twitter knows. So the downside of that is if the person hasn't been using the service very long, or it's a sock puppet account on Twitter, or there's like, a few other things, you might not get a lot of data back, but it will give you back as much data as it can that you asked for and that was given permission to you. But again, with the diagrams, stop with the diagrams. Show me. I will. And I actually get to brag about this one because Google didn't build this. I built a lot of this with some of my team members. So we just launched this a few days ago. It's called the OpenID Connect Playground, and we built it because we love the OAuth 2 playground, but there was no alternative for OpenID Connect. But we have lots of people with questions about OID Connect. OpenID Connect. I tend to mix the full pronunciation with the acronym. So if you hear something that sounds vaguely like OpenID Connect or OIDC or like OpenICD, that's probably what I'm talking about. So this, and ours looks nicer. So when you go in, it's automatically configured to use an app that we set up. So you can also use Google. So I'll show you how discovery works. So this is where Google's discovery document is. It will always be there. Like, it will never not be there until they issue a 301 and warn you well in advance, hey, this document's moving, here's where it's moving to. And as you can see below it, the authorization endpoint, the token endpoint, the token keys endpoint, those have all populated themselves. Not because we did anything with the playground. We said, take the JSON file at this URL. Token endpoint is token underscore endpoint. Authorization endpoint is authorization underscore endpoint. Populate the fields. So we didn't magically program those URLs in there. That's the power of the discovery layer of OIDC. And that's why I love it so much, is I don't have to remember 4 different URLs. I have to remember one standardized URL, so I really only have to remember a domain. So anyways, we're going to go back to the canonical one. I'm going to click it, and then it pre-populates. We set up an account with just like a free setup, so you could use it to test OIDC. And then the scopes we're asking for are OpenID and profile. So OpenID is just the ability to log in via OAuth, and profile is basically like every basic piece of information you can get about a user, just send it over to us. We save some stuff in local storage, so we give you a warning, like, hey, if you want to get rid of stuff in local storage, you can. Much like OAuth, it's telling us here that what we're going to do is we're going to make a request to this domain to basically get me to log in, right? So I'm going to click Start, and it's going to redirect me to this page. And last time I signed in with Twitter, so I'll sign in with Twitter again. And I will authorize. Never automate that if I haven't said it enough. And so now, see how cool ours is? It like scrolls down. Anyway, I'm just proud of it because I helped make it. I don't know. Call it Hubers. But now we have a code. So that login code says, okay, you've now successfully gained authorization. Here's your code. But remember, your code is just the key to the safe, or the code to the safe to get the house key. So next you see post back to that same authorization server with the code we just got for a token. Now, I know I said we never put it in the browser. This is literally the only acceptable time to put a token in a browser, is to show someone how OIDC works so they can see their token. Because we're about to do that. I just wanted to call that out before someone goes, hey, wait a minute. And yes, we're going to put a token in a browser for only educational purposes. So I'm not a complete hypocrite, just a mildly forgetful one. So I'm going to exchange code. And there you go. So I have my access token, ID token, and my token type. We got rid of refresh tokens because we figured someone would get smart and use refresh tokens against us on our free sample account. So yeah, we got rid of the refresh token. But in cases where you request one, you would get a refresh token back with this as well. So we've got our access token, our ID token, and the token type. So there are a couple types of tokens. 98% of the time it will be a bearer token. This was the huge rift between OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, was the concept of bearer tokens. So in OAuth 1, all of your tokens that represented a user's authentication had to be signed by some algorithm with a secret. All of them, no exceptions. OAuth 2 said, well, that's kind of hard, so let's make bearer tokens, where just holding the token means it's okay. That's super flexible and super dangerous, kind of like a very springy sword, you know, like super flexible, super dangerous. Aaron Hammer wrote a very angry but well thought out piece about why this was a bad idea. However, we do have a way around that, so we can have signed, unsigned bearer tokens. JWTs, JSON Web Tokens, are the way around that, and I forgot to pull up that URL, so I'm going to do that now. So JWTs/JSON Web Tokens are an easy way to create signed bearer tokens for your OAuth 2 requests. All they are is base64 encoded JSON objects, and they are signed by either a symmetric algorithm, where you would have a secret on your server that signs the token, and then the other party would have the secret so they could verify it, Or you could use asymmetrical, you could use RSA public-private key pairs to sign these tokens. But they're much easier to use than the tokens of OAuth1, and they're much more secure. And if you really want to go full security, like banks, hospitals, things like that, you can also use JavaScript web encryption to encrypt your JSON web token. So then they have to decrypt it and they have to verify the signature, because this doesn't actually encrypt anything. It just base64 encodes it and signs it. And you can verify the signature, but anybody can see the data. Like, they just have to base64 decode it. So the data is not like obscured in any way, really, any really tough way. It's just you can verify that the token was from who they say they are. But if you use JWE, too many J's, JavaScript web encryption, you can encrypt your signed JSON web token and have a very secure Auth0 2.0 experience. So while I believe Aaron Hammer's article was very poignant at the time, I believe we've developed methods to make Auth0 2.0, OAuth, you would be surprised how many times I make that mistake, OAuth 2.0 as secure as we need it to be in its flexibility. So, but still, keep that in mind if you're ever going to use JWTs. If you're working in a highly secure environment, they don't actually encrypt anything. They just base64 encode it and sign it. Back to the playground. We now have our token. And, we're going to see that site again momentarily. So a lot of OID, in fact, all OIDC providers use JSON tokens, JWTs, as their bearer tokens. So OIDC kind of pulls back to OAuth1 and says, yeah, maybe signed tokens weren't the worst idea. Let's use JWTs for everything. And then that way it needs to be signed. Now, if you sign, either way, if you sign with a symmetrical secret or an RSA key pair, the location has to be available in your configuration, the known configuration URL. It's part of the JSON object that comes back. For Google, it gives you 3 URLs and it says the RSA key is at one of those URLs we promise, which is so not annoying to have to run 3 HTTP requests in parallel and see which one comes back and works. But anyway, the way we do it is a symmetric secret. So your client secret is what we use to sign your authentication tokens. So we're going to hit verify. Oh, we already hit verify. And because the client secret was correct on both ends, the token's valid, and it even decrypted it here for me. And as you can see a lot about me just from my Twitter profile. You can get my name, a picture of me, just my own description of myself, what time zone I'm in, like a lot of information about me. Surprising amount of information, less than Google though. Google has a surprising amount of information on a lot of us. Also, 3 fields to keep in mind of when you're dealing with JWTs. Too many acronyms, I swear. It's like my brain is a stack, and like the acronyms just keep falling off the end. It just keep overflowing. EXP stands for expiration, so the access token is no longer valid after this timestamp. Issued at is a great access token because you would be surprised how many people will try to spoof a token and set the issued at to like the future. And you're like, wait a minute, that hasn't happened yet. That's probably not a valid token. So issued at and expired at are very handy. Sub is handy depending on the provider. Not really for Twitter. For Google, it can be handy. And issuer is good because you want to make sure it's who you thought it was. And yes, you're verifying the signature, but it's better to check twice than not check at all. So I usually check my issuer and make sure it's the same domain that I requested it from. And if it's not the same domain, it should be a subdomain of that domain. So that's OIDC. It's just like, it looked a lot like a lot of people. One person was very not impressed, and they walked up to me after one of these talks, and they were like, OIDC is just like OAuth. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. It's a wrapper around OAuth to give you identity. Like, I was like, I don't know what you're mad about. Like, don't, and plus, if you're mad, like, go talk to the people who wrote the specification. I just read it and wrote a talk on it. Like, you're yelling at the wrong person. Anyway. So where's the library for OIDC? That's a trick question because Passport, at least, and most of the other libraries support OIDC for anyone that provides it. because it's so similar to OAuth, and because it's so intertwined with OAuth, a lot of OAuth library writers said, forget it, we'll just add OIDC into our platform. So for instance, Passport has two strategies for Google OAuth and Google OIDC. So if you want to use just OAuth and you don't want the user's identity, you use the Google OAuth strategy. And if you want their information, you use the Google OIDC strategy. Problem solved. So where do I learn even more about OpenID Connect and OAuth? OpenID.net is the standard site for OpenID Connect. It used to look like it was from 1998, but now they have a hero image, so it looks like it's from 2007. And all the specifications are on there. None of the specifications are less than 12 pages long, I know, because I've read them all. But they're really interesting reads if you're interested in user identity. If you're not, they're really dry and boring. But if you're really interested in user identity, they're really good reads. OpenIDConnect.net, that was the step-by-step walkthrough I walked you through. We actually found a user was implementing OpenID Connect, and they were using our playground to test whether they worked. We were like their test platform. It was pretty great. And it can go into, we offer walking through Google, your own OIDC implementation, and Auth0's OIDC implementation. And then for OAuth, developers.google.com/OAuth playground, because they don't like buying domains like we do. Thanks for listening to this talk. I'm not quite completely done. This is just my normal last slide. Carl Sagan thinks you're awesome. I think you're awesome. I'm nodebotanist everywhere. I have yet to find a service where the username nodebotanist was taken. And I've said that several times, and no one has been super snarky and like registered nodebotanist on a service just to piss me off. So like, please don't. Also, but I've gotten the ones I really want, which are Twitter and GitHub. Kas@auth0.com is my email address. I also have sticker business cards with me, so once I'm done with my other talk, feel free to come up to me. And if you play Overwatch, I'm nodebotanist number 1117. I play mostly support characters, so if you need a healer, Lucio forever, man. All right. So my second talk is about serverless architectures. So who's heard the word serverless? Keep your hand up if you're like, how would I not need a server? Like, what are you possibly talking about? I'm gonna keep my hand up because I was like that for a while. I was like, what do you mean serverless? Like, I get single page applications are cool and all, but we have to have a server. So serverless is kind of a misnomer. What they mean by that is it's more of a run third-party code on our servers instead of running them on your servers. So there's still a server. It's just not your server, which is a really long thing to say, which is probably why they went with serverless. So there are two major players in the serverless market as of recently. Well, one major and one's major because I really care about it. One is AWS Lambda. Anybody used it? Keep your hand up if you enjoyed using it. Yeah, that's what I thought. I've tried it. They're trying, but there's very little documentation and it's very difficult to get set up. It took me 50 minutes to get a Hello World running on that thing. And as a developer evangelist, that's one of my only metrics, is time to first Hello World. And for 50 minutes, it's just absurd. Like, it's just no. I think they're relying on them being Amazon. So, like, you'll use them because they're Amazon, which is fair. I mean, if you're Amazon, that's not a bad argument, I guess. But anyway, the other one, which I'm a little more fond of and biased, I work there, is called Webtask.io. And, of course, I don't have that URL put up because that would mean I was prepared. This would be a really bad time for the site to be down. Okay, good. So, Webtask, as a company of Auth0, they have the same, well, it's not even a company, it's just part of Auth0. We have the same developer vision that we do with Auth0 with Webtask, and it should be as easy as possible to get a developer started, and you should be able to get started in less than 5 minutes. That's our goal. Who here writes Node at all? Fun, profit, whatever, most of you, right? Okay, so, to write a Webtask piece of code, all you have to do is say module, nope, that's not how you do that in WS Code or MS Code. View. Of course there's no keyboard shortcut for zoom in. I love Visual Studio Code, and I hated Microsoft up until 2 years ago, but I love Visual Studio Code. But I have now found the one problem with it is that it doesn't zoom in and zoom out the way I want it to. So all you need to get started on Webtask.io is npm install -JWT-CLI. Log in with it. It'll leave, I think we fixed it. You can create an account from the command line. And then you write your code, which is module.exports equals function. You can take in context and callback, or context and rec and res. And when you call it with context and callback, you need to call the callback with error first styling. So if you have no error, null, comma, whatever data you want to send back to the caller, and you have an error, comma, null. If you do it with rec and res, you have access to a typical HTTP server from Node Core. We use Node 4.7. We use Node Stable on our machines right now, but you can use Babel. We've built in Babel support. Anyway, so I've used in this particular example rec and res because I want this to be an HTTP server because I'm going to have something calling this. You'll get why that's funny in a minute. So I'm calling the Particle API. Particle, in case you didn't know, are the lovely folks who make these things. Oh, that's not good. That's new. Oh, I ungrounded it. That's all. No big deal. There we go. Really? Now? I lifted you like 5 centimeters. This is ridiculous. And this, my friends, is why hardware demos are the best. Because you get to make lots of self-deprecating jokes while your stuff falls apart. Anyway, so that's what this is running on. It's Particle Photon. In case you're interested in getting into robotics, $20 is all that thing costs. It connects to the Wi-Fi. It has a Wi-Fi chip built in. Fairly good documentation. You can't write for it in Node. So if you're really interested in nodebots in particular, I would recommend the Tessel 2. Tessel, T-E-S-S-E-L. I'll show you their website at the end of this mini talk. You can write directly in Node for them. And they just got out of shipping all their pre-orders, and that's $35. So it's a little more expensive, but you get to write straight Node. I think $15 is a reasonable premium to write Node. Anyway, tangent complete. Back to Webtask. So when you call this Webtask, and I'll show you where to get the URL in a moment, it takes the query, because it gets it from the context. So context is query parameters, body parameters, if it's posted to, whatever you really want it to be. You can really kind of mess around with what the context variable actually is going to be. So I ask for either the body parameter or the color parameter. The color parameter is for where I'm testing it from the browser. The body parameter is from the other input method, which I'll show you in a moment. You may recognize it if you've used it, and considering they're a huge sponsor, you probably have. Anyway, it then checks the message for a color. Either a hex color starting with a hash. I refuse to call it a hashtag. I will at least compromise on hash. Or if the color is rainbow, or if it's not, go up here and see if there's a matching RGB color for it. You may recognize this list as the CSS colors list, including such lovely colors as Gainsborough, Lemon Chiffon, and the actually lovely color of Rebecca Purple. I love the color Rebecca Purple. Like, this story is very sad, but I'm really glad that they did that. It's a very nice memorial to what happened. I'm not trying to laugh off a tragedy. It's a lovely shade of purple, and it was for a lovely cause. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go ahead and look up the origins of Rebecca Purple. It's a very touching, sad, and in the end, beautiful story, because the CSS community came together and pushed through a new standard in like 2 weeks to serve as a memorial to a young child. So, good stuff. And it's a lovely shade of purple. So once it does that, it calls a particle function, which calls a function sitting here on this microcontroller to change the colors. So now I'm going to give you a phone number. I'm going to grab my phone and figure out what that phone number is. It's so rude. The speaker was on her phone for like 30 seconds. And now you can take your phones out without looking super rude, if you want, and text this phone number, a CSS parsable color, or, oh, that's really small. I'm going to try zooming in a couple more times. Zoom in. Oh, that's not making the text any bigger. All right, fine. I'll open my user preferences and make the font size bigger that way, because why not? Oh, right. Won't let me edit that one. Okay, VS Code, you might have just lost your spot as my presentation editor. I mean, I love it for straight up editing, but it's for presentations, it's been kind of wonky. Let's say wonky. Wonky is a non-offensive term and not an expletive. Say 30, comma. Okay, that's much bigger. Cool. Of course. Okay, there we go. So, feel free to text that number, any color. If it's a hex color, it needs to start with a hash. Otherwise, it's just the name of the color. You can also text it rainbow. Someone, I think, just turned it yellow-green. Yeah, because it's not cycling anymore. That or it fell apart again. No, it's not falling apart. Someone actually texted it green. So, when you develop with Twilio, I love their developer experience. Don't get me wrong. I get to the dashboard and it says webhooks, and I think, oh, webhooks, that's really cool. I can call stuff. And then I think, I have to deploy a server for that. And I don't want to put an AWS server up to just like change some weights. That's where this comes in handy. One of the things we've been working on is extensibility as a service. It's like the idea that you can extend your own service by allowing users to write third-party code for it that's run in a safe environment that protects you. So we have a whole appliance meant to keep things safe, keep the code contained, but allow you to actually affect things in the world around you. So Webtask is able to pull in the Particle.js API, be used by Twilio as a webhook, which is why it says query.body, because that's the body of the text message that you're sending. Yeah, that's where serverless really gets its power. It's situations where we're too lazy to spin up a server, which is like 2% of it, and 98% of it is I can extend my business model by allowing third-party code to be run that affects my servers, but it's also safe. Because I'm just old enough to remember eval is evil, and just old enough to remember everybody saying, oh, third-party code in JavaScript, it'll never happen. You'll never run third-party code on your servers. No, you will. You do, with Lambda and Webtask and the whole serverless movement. I feel like serverless isn't going to become as much a consumer model as it will be a developer model, because the way I see the future is when you have software as a service, serverless architectures will come into play when you want to allow your users, your developers who are also users, to extend your service via that ability to run third-party code. For instance, the reason Webtask came about, I know, you know what? I said that for the first talk, so I'm not voiding my promise. I'm going to pull up Auth0, because the reason Webtask came about, I'm going to log in with Google, the reason Webtask came about was because we built Webtask to make the rules engine for Auth0. And all that is, I'm not going to go into it because this is not a product pitch, all that is the ability for users to write events that happen after login in Node. So that's regular Node code. You might recognize it if it were here. But considering the Zoom support I've had today, I'm not going to make that any bigger. You can also look it up. That's where Webtask came from. And then we realized, oh, this might be useful, so we made it a service. So that's how I see serverless playing into the future. Not so much a consumer model, because only 2% of it is going to be a dev who's like, I want to do this demo, but I don't want to spin up a whole AWS instance for it. Let me just write a webhook. 98% of it's going to be, I have this really cool software as a service, but people keep asking me for features I don't want to implement. So I'm going to put in this serverless architecture so they can run their third-party code and extend the service themselves. So those are both my talks. So I'm going to put my goodbye slide up again one more time, just in case anyone didn't get my contact information. Also, is that not the cutest Overwatch wallpaper you've ever seen? Because it is the cutest Overwatch wallpaper there is. I know, I've looked. Huh? I can't hear you. No, I did not make it. I'm not that narcissistic. Not everything I have up here is made by me. I didn't make Carl Sagan. Huh? I didn't make the GIF either. I found it on the internet. See, I'm willing to admit when I didn't make something. I Googled Carl Sagan GIFs and that showed up. Somebody else did it. So anyway.
Carl Sagan created it himself.
That I doubt that highly, considering he was a human being. Pretty sure 2 other people had a hand in his creation. Anyway, nodebotanist on Twitter and GitHub. Kas Auth0 via email. Nodebotanist117. I do not know why there's a 117. There are not 1,116 other nodebotanists on battle.net, but whatever. 117. Anyway, that's it.